Without further ado, we're going to start the first segment of the conference on alternative archives. I am made aware that a few people under this panel haven't sent in their presentations, but then I hope you're all ready with what you're going to present. So the very first presentation to go that will be delivered by Lizzie Ridout. I'm hoping I pronounced your name properly. She's looking at Ærkologies as archive.
Hi. I am going to share my screen. So just bear with me a moment. Okay, hopefully you can see a web page with 3 buttons in the top left-hand corner. Great. Okay, I'm just gonna bear with me. Okay. So, see a problem. Okay. Just gonna try and hide all of you so I can see my notes. Okay, there we go. So hi, my name is Lizzie Ridout. I just want to say thanks as well to the DHS team for organising all of this. Super smooth operation, people. It's been amazing. It's been really slick and yeah, very, very easy to work with you. So thanks so much for that. And also I looked at everyone's papers and I just thought it was really interesting, all the different things that people are talking about. So I'm actually, yeah, really, really interested to hear about everybody's work over the coming days. So firstly, a positionality statement. I'm non-religious, I'm white, cisgender, straight, able-bodied, I'm nearly 50, I'm British-born woman. I'm primarily an artist and designer, I'm a mum, I'm a PhD student, and I work in a university. And I'm very aware that my identity and the privileges that I've experienced mean I've got particular perspectives that inevitably influence the work that I make and the analysis that I'll be presenting in the talk. Also, while I'm here, I'm going to refer to various decolonial theories in my project, and my project explores air, and this isn't equating air's extraction to the very real human traumas that have been suffered. It's more about positioning the project as an interrogation of the shared site of these historical erasures, so that is within the colonial archive. So, to provide a bit of context, the paper's part of a practice-based PhD that's addressing the archival erasure of air within the colonial repository. The colonial archive, in the way that it's privileged human ownership, has systematically silenced more than human witnesses, and this project's been conceived as a kind of decolonial redress of that omission, and specifically in relation to air, as mentioned. I'm using what I'm calling an archival curatorial publishing practice that I hope is going to create a surrogate archive of and for air through a collection of unfixed expanded publications. The vast majority of Earth's ecosystems rely on air, but air is really problematic. Air has evaded my grasp. It's diffuse, it's immaterial, it's unfixed, it's unboundaried. I've searched for it in archives, but was really quickly frustrated because I realised that what I was finding, in fact, wasn't air, but was representations of things that maybe contain air, so balloons or bubbles or clouds, or are contained in or pass through air, so spores or pollutants or gods or radio waves and sound. Or they demonstrate humans harnessing of air, so through measurements. So, for example, air quality analysis reports or apportioning of air, so it's mapping in military no-fly zones, or in narrativization of air, so through weather diaries or logbooks. So raw air, and I'm calling it air as subject, doesn't seem to be present. And in fact, I'm not even sure I know anymore what that is. My mission hasn't been helped by the fact that many people consider air a void or an emptiness and not something that is actually full of anything at all anyway. And that imperceptibility makes it feel like I'm continually trying to locate an absence of absence. And that's both befuddling and a bit delightful and a bit intriguing. And it keeps me sort of moving forward. But so why has air resisted the archive? And exploring that question, this paper specifically asks, what constitutes an archival document, and do these definitions partially explain air's archival elision? And then secondly, what archival forms might support a decolonial reparation of air's omission? So I'm going to look first at how documents are defined, and then I'll reflect on whether that explains air's resistance to the archive. And then I'm going to consider other types of archival omission. And finally, I'll discuss archival systems that might be appropriate for framing and creating my own archive. So it's a bit of a romp. I'll try and keep time. So let's start with documents. So documents in administrative archives are things that write history, and they are what have been prioritized. And to understand the archive, I have to understand documents. So in various dictionaries, a document is defined as a writing conveying information, a material substance having on it a representation of thoughts by means of marks or symbols, and something that provides information or evidence or serves as an official record. So we've got material, textual, intelligible marks, evidence, and a decree by someone that it's official. So airs are problematic when it's held up against those terms, because air as a medium does carry histories. If you think about scent, if you think about pollution and breath and sound, and that's backed up by theorists like Stacey Alamo, who states that atmosphere function as a transcorporeal record. It's just not recorded in a way that archives are like, because air isn't material and it has to be mediated via something else in order to become inscribed. So straight away, we're not like seeing air as a subject, we're seeing it as some sort of form of translation. In 1951, Suzanne Briet, a librarian and historian, published Qu'est-ce que la documentation? And in it, she defined the document as any concrete or symbolic indexical sign preserved or recorded towards the end of representing, reconstituting, or proving a physical or intellectual phenomenon. Quite a lot to get your head around. The definition, she argued, was accurate but abstract. And what she wrote next, I think, is quite helpful in understanding what she was meaning. She asked, is a star a document? Is a pebble rolled by a torrent a document? Is a living animal a document? She says no, but the photographs and the catalogues of stars, the stones in a museum of mineralogy, and the animals that are catalogued and shown in a zoo are documents. So for Briet, a document must, on top of what I've already outlined, it's got to be an intentional human act, and it's got to provide information. So the stars that she's talking about is not a document because it's not an intentional recording. A star kind of just is. And Briet reminds us that this is a system that's designed by humans for humans. In the 90s, Michael Buckland surveyed how different disciplines have reflected on the problematic terms of document and documentation. And he builds on Briet's and other people's ideas from the perspective of the information sciences. And what emerges from his work is initially a term document as thing, and then in response to other ideas that are thrown in by other people and growing ideas of his own, in 2018, he offers up document theory. And that details, or the whole body of work details a comprehensive and very kind of expanded understanding of what is categorized as a document. And his big move really in all of that work is to treat anything as a document as long as it can be defined as evidence. So he recognizes images and objects and specimens and landscapes, oral histories, embodied practices, and really any form of embodied knowledge or embodied practice really that can be classed as a form of knowledge production. And certainly that has to be argued as evidence as well. And he justifies this in a number of ways, one of which is in moving beyond the idea of simply the notion of the intentioned creator of a document. So I'm making this document and I declare it as a document, to suggest that actually just perceiving or sensing an object, and even if you don't actually know its sort of full signification yet, that can make it into a document too. So Maurizio Ferraris has a theory of documentality, and it's a useful pivot here because it provides more a further ontological framing. And he argues that documents are not simply records that describe reality, but are rather instruments that produce and solidify reality. And he talks about what he calls social objects, and he uses the examples of a marriage or a law or money. He talks about these social objects that are legible and enforceable through inscription and through documents. And he's saying that without the document, the phenomena can be contested. But when it's inscripted, when it's inscribed, those phenomena are legible, they're institutionalized, they're governable and tradable. And he talks about a wedding where none of the people who attend remember the wedding. No one who knew even that the wedding existed remember the wedding. And no, there's no photographs, there's no documentation, there's no marriage certificate. And without all of that stuff, can we argue that the wedding even existed? So he's saying that the entity and its document are not separate realities. And returning to the question of how air has resisted the archival inscription then, Brie and Buckland are saying that air can only be represented in the archive if it's perceived and if it's mediated, so by a barometer reading or a narrative record or something. And I guess what I see aligns to that. But because air is always framed via human utility, it's only ever a partial representation of air as subject. And that makes, I have to sort of ask a couple of questions. So firstly, were the tools to mediate air even available at the time that these records were being kept? So, were there other ways to understand air, but there were no tools to do that? And also, was air ever even perceived as anything other than accidental and background, or about, it's only really about human endeavor? Was it even part of a colonial consciousness? So Ferraris's claim that the documents institute reality, it suggests that the archive isn't just missing air, it's actively producing an air that fits the archive's own extractive logics. It makes air into a resource. So if I reframe that as a third question, is it that air as subject fails to be included in the archive because of certain kind of slippery inherent qualities that it's got? Or is it that the colonial archive as a framework fails to recognize air as subject? And is that intentional? So the archive's epistemic foundation does insist that inclusion in an archive is based on something being stored, retrievable, and interpretable as evidence. So the archives and documents have been and remain a tool of suppression in shaping dominant narratives of memory and identity, and that they are instrumental in limiting varied knowledge forms is really well documented. So another aspect of the work that I've been looking at are other forms of archival absence, why they occurred, what it means, and how we might attend to that. And I obviously here owe a massive debt to the historians and theorists who work in decolonial theory and practice who've done incredible work. So these are just three people that I have provided some sort of guidance and often warnings actually in considering archival omission. I'm sure lots of you will be familiar with them. So I've looked at Michel Ralph-Troyal, who's been so important because he provides a kind of method to understand that all archival silences are not the same, and that they need to be approached in different ways and sensitively. And he outlines 4 different occasions in which silence enter the process of what he calls historical production. So he talks about the moment when facts are created, so that's the making of sources, the moment when facts are assembled, so the creating of an archive with those sources, the moment of fact retrieval, so the making of the narrative around a source, and then finally what he calls the retrospective significance, so the making of history in the final instance. The feminist theorist Sadja Hartman's critical fabulation is another thing I've looked at, so her literary method of writing against the archive, and her work attempts to retrieve the lives of enslaved people, recognizing the trauma that's associated within the archive, but also the limits of writing to really be able to articulate that trauma. And she warns that this method of critical fabulation isn't about filling gaps or providing any kind of closure, because you never can, like that's not possible. And she asks a really important question, like, how do you take from the archive without enabling the archive? And how do you not get caught up in its structures of value? The historian Anne Stoller offers an alternative reading of the archive, which is along the grain rather than against it, like Hartman suggests. And she reframes the document as the colonial ledger, and she encourages an analysis of how the state produced knowledge and used paperwork precisely as a tool to manage what she calls the epistemic anxiety. So in other words, admin was used to support colonial governance based on a terror of what was unknown and uncontrollable. Like if you don't know something, if you don't understand something, like fill it with information. It's like papering over. She talks about papering over. And Stoller argues that you shouldn't just be looking for an absence, you should also recognize that absences of knowledge were state-filled, and so you need to look for the presence too. So reflecting on all of this theory, I'm currently looking at different forms of alternative archive that, like my mission, challenge the logics of the colonial repository. So, for example, I am looking at natural archives. So they attempt to recognize the violence of the colonial sciences. And an example of a natural archive is the Arctic, which has been declared one because it's argued that ice is a memory medium. I've also looked at negative archives, which quite literally work to recognize the gaps in an archive and then to occupy them and simultaneously kind of expose the logic that they were produced within. So it essentially creates the negative of an archive. And then there's counter archives, and these are also oppositional correctives that confront what traditional archives do not contain. But rather than occupying the silence, like with some kind of equivalence, like filling the gap, instead they produce material that tries to expand the archive and expand the space and to exist in a sort of productive tension, I suppose, with the system silences. And then finally, I was looking at meta archives, and these are the systems that record their own conditions. So they're really interesting in terms of archives and documents because they reveal the problematic territories of the archive. And so for me, like the fact that indexes cannot recognize immateriality is a really interesting thing to explore and to look at the conditions that set that up. And meta archives can also be an index of other archives, which is interesting. So, to conclude, as subject resists classification of both document and archive, and it evades the capture and measurement and preservation that's in the ways that archival systems demand of them. And in that refusal to be solidified, becomes a critique of those systems. And the question remains for me as to how to archive air without creating just another form of extraction and without perpetuating air as commodity or resource. I'm currently thinking probably about a meta archive within which I might be able to explore both counter and negative archive as a way to sort of test different ideas. And I suspect that the work that I create will need to resist extraction by performing its own archival failure. I'm going to stop there because I don't think I've got time. I think that puts me at about 15 minutes. And so I'm not going to talk about the visuals that accompany the talk.
Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. It carries a lot of weight. I'm using a lot of decolonial theories as well for cultural continuity, but it's a very good perspective and a food for thought on, how we can approach air as a form of archiving system that doesn't still sit within the frameworks of colonial institutes. That was very well put. So we'll go to the next presenter. That's going to be giving her presentation on Against the End, Objects, Atelier, and Repair Histories in Delhi. This is by Garima Bhardwaj from Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi. If you want to share your screen, so. All right, just start the timer then. Over to you.
Just a moment, please. Is my screen visible? I hope it's full screen.
I can see your screen, yeah.
All right.
Do you want to put on present?
I hope the screen is not a hindrance while I mean, nothing's getting blocked.
Sorry, I didn't quite get that.
I just hope there's no hindrance on the screen. That's all.
Could everyone put like an emoji thumbs up if you can see her screen clearly?
Okay.
Okay. All right, everyone.
All right. So, good day, everyone. I am Garima Bhardwaj, currently a PhD scholar at IIT Delhi. I am being guided by Professor Saurabh Tiwari, who is a design historian himself. And put up in Delhi. I have a background in design. And I have industrial design, worked as a designer in Solitaires, and thereafter I did my study design management because I felt advised to work with marginalized communities. Hence, I have more expertise with craft sector. And currently, my PhD topic is around repair as design, and specifically in Delhi. So the topic that I will be speaking today will be associated with the ephemeral encounters that happen during the repair journeys and repair culture prevalent in Delhi. So just an overview that I'm walking you through certain repair hubs that prevail in India, and these are very ephemeral encounters of everyday life and everyday breakdowns that these thinkers kind of help us move ahead in life. And the argument is that repair should act as a legitimate design ontology because repair, though holds a lot of institutional value, it also needs to have a place in design while being discussed at an ideation or conceptual level. Hence, the study is focused at a circular root system, the closed root system, so that the current problems such as, or a landfill site that we experience is not an ephemeral encounter of our everyday lives. And it's a multi-sided ethnographic study. So there are different cohorts in it, and hence I will be talking about the textile and leather, the electronics, and the furniture market. Just for this study, it's just a small version of this, and I'm already 1.5 years into my study, so I'll be just presenting partial work. Thereafter, there is a proposed methodological shift, which is more directional in nature. The theoretical foundation is basically a three-pronged approach that we've taken. So one is coming from a decolonial and university perspective, from the past, wherein we discuss that there are multiple ways of doing things and there are plural perspectives to looking at the world around us. And repair acts as a grassroots mechanism for local material self-determination and autonomous creations. The second is coming from Jackson, wherein we are moving the world thinking and how these broken world thinking can later on contribute as central narrative to the current technological shift that we see and longingness that we see for high tech as compared to the repair sector that we have. And thereby, there's a little bit bent towards which go because his perspectives come from socio-technical ensembles, and he talks about the socio-cultural relevance and physical structure and how repair kind of alters them. So largely, we'll be looking at the object that is at a micro scale. Thereafter, the ateliers, and when I say ateliers, I'm also referring to workshops, and these unmapped areas that prevail in the city as repair hubs or repair sites, which in vernacular language exist as addas or chalks or lanes, wherein these repair sites are present. And largely, I'll be looking at Delhi from a systemic inquiry perspective, how these temporal geographical landscape is operating, because Delhi has a very interesting topography when we talk of India and world in context, because meeting critics started happening from here. So my research question is that how do these fleeting encounters between practitioner and how an object in Delhi's repair house construct an alternative design ontology rooted in improvisation and care? And care is something the world really needs today. So just to talk to you of the spiral model that we just saw. So the center of it is the object. The outer layer is the atelier, the workspace, which comprises of the spatial dynamics, the spatial ergonomics, the master and learners, interactions and how the translation of knowledge takes place at the sensory graph itself and at the outer level, Delhi as a city scheme. So the three cohorts that I mentioned before are this. The first one being the electronics and parts. So we all have the difference of planned obsolescence, and we all have ended up splurging more than what we were just because these were intentionally placed in the way or it broke down, and especially in the colonial perspective and the global south, they've experienced it all the more because the waste phenomenon kind of also spread when the waste was brought down in ships and other means at the sites that were prevalent, and the ecosystem was also disrupted. The second that I'm discussing about is textiles and leather. So there we see repair happening and other movements happening in Amsterdam, Australia, and other places. But repair in context of textiles has existed in majority world since prehistoric era, and a lot of crafts are also centered around it. However, the textile, the repair that I will be talking about in Delhi's context is more related to grapple or darning, as we call it in Britain. And third is the furniture sector, where we talk of the basic recomposition, the materiality, the exploration of remaining parts, and different material explorations that can be done to extend the life. Now, these are now in these cohorts, there are different nature of ephemeral encounters that happen because the cohorts are different, the practitioners are different, and also their placement in terms of finances and socioeconomic status is different in each cohort. And one example is, and now we move to the Ateliers. On the left-hand side, you see how a mobile repair worker or a utensil and appliances repairer is moving on his own bike. He has this small, attachment on behind, which is itself, a jugaad or a quick fix that we have figured out. It's not an industrial design, but these are some hacks that these repairers develop to exist or facilitate their everyday repair encounters with people, and they travel from street to street, helping people out. The second context is of special ergonomics, that is in context of textile and leather goods. So we often see very small desks with the machine, and they practically have negligible, space occupancy when we talk of city. So they have this small desk workspaces where they are doing, and they put it somewhere into a space, and sometimes they lock it as it is, and it exists in a very ephemeral state in everyday life in the streets that we operate. And lastly, you can see the Ustad Shagird dynamic. So this is the master and the student dynamic that I'm talking about. So Ustad is the master, and Shagird is the one who's learning from the master. So if you see in terms of hierarchy, also the one sitting above is the Ustad here, who is basically training the one who's sitting below. And the space, the place where they are going to mention to people or they exist is in itself really ephemeral. You might or you might not find them tomorrow. So it also depends on what the system allows them, how they are placed within the city. So these were some of these ethnographic sites that I covered in my ephemeral study. And I observed that these destinations are not fixed. They appear overnight. They shift. There are municipality raids. The cops sometimes take money from them to exist in these spaces, and they actually have no institutional place or valid location. Secondly, these sites are absent from Google Maps. When we were learning about ethnography and we were learning about qualitative methods, is something known as community mapping. And it's only through community mapping and word of mouth and these ephemeral encounters that people have with these repairers that we come to know about their existences in the city. However, traditionally, it did differ a bit when I was growing up. And these clusters migrate with weather. There are addiction riots and market cycles. So because it is very hot in Delhi right now, we're touching temperatures around 48, 52 sometimes during the day. So, you see most of them have packed up things and left for their hometowns to survive. And the ones who do not make enough are actually burning their skins out there just because they want to feed their stomachs. So that's how, that's the urgency of this craft. And there are no written archives about their knowledge transfer because in India there has been a tradition of oral recitals and narrative process. So, I mean, all in all, this repair ontology is really different from the physical innovation, and it acts more in time. And here we have certain examples on the right from the cohorts that I have picked up. So we see that, some of the observations, that at an object level, there are solder bridges, there are jump wires, there are, these traces, there are stars, there are these mended visible patches that are there. And some parts are substituted with the others, and examples of them you can see on the right. Then at an atelier level, we see that they are prevalent. So I have intentionally selected these pictures because you can see the difference in how they're operating. The first one is actually from electronics and parts. So they are located in the middle place, which is a hub for electronic repair. They have a better status because electronic repair of laptops, mobiles, and gadgets actually falls under the high-tech repair category. Hence, the dignity is also associated accordingly. And then comes your, on the right-hand side, we have a furniture repair side. Below that, we have a chalk. So they exist, they come together, they form a line here, and whatever work you have, you can talk to the person, take them. So this particular lane exists just because they are present, and otherwise, it vanishes by 5 p.m. or so. So 9:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., they're present on these streets. And these are very specific locations. And then we see a Dana sitting with the swing machine. So he does operations and certain form of repairs, certain form of repair with needle as well, and he practices rockwood. So some of these observations are that they have zero infrastructure footprint. What they're doing is through muscle memory. There's a particular physical stance that they used to operate in these sites, and there's a defense mechanism that is prevalent in these sites and acts there. Now, when these things, like when they are operating in everyday life and trying to resolve problems, so these are certain things which causes their displacement. So you can see on the left, there is some sort of construction work going on, which is probably because of the municipality, and we cannot say no to it. So some of the reasons are that there's a raid. So when the raid happens, basically the police officers come, they take away their things or they move them because it's not an authorized space for them to use. And in the situation, people who have trusted them in these encounters, so progress, trust, and longevity of their existence gets compromised. The second aspect is gentrification. So even if they take a space, the rents are something that they cannot match because everything is acting against them. The end of how they're going to meet their end is also decided by how many people or how many encounters they're actually having. Then comes the digital mapping that I mentioned before, that they do not have any visibility on the maps and exist through word of mouth or memory that they saw some repair or some place, or if you hear a sound breakthrough in the city, like Muchi or so these are very different terms that we use, and a high pitched sound will be heard in the street noise. And I do see a policy blind spot as well when it comes to urban planning and their heritage frameworks. In India and in the majority world, the task is not to introduce as we do in Amsterdam or US or Australia. But in India and majority world, it is more about preservation, facilitating and enabling it. And that's where my work is primarily based. Lastly, there's succession gap. So because there's no respect, there's no dignity, and their existence, their ephemeral encounter is in itself compromised. So there's a generational gap that is coming. A lot of them are now switching to gig economy work rather than choosing a craft that's generational or embodied knowledge based, because there's no money or trust in this ecosystem. We will prefer replacing than repairing. And here's a loop of memory. So basically, there's an object that we'll be talking about. There's a glitch, and there's a dynamic of care, negotiation, and memory association. Sometimes even family trust that comes in between the user and the repairer. And then, there's Ateliers where the improvisation is happening in the city, your home, at a designated spot, at a hub, or somewhere in the city, and then comes your Delhi, which is the larger network of repair when we compare it to rest of India, because it's also the capital. So each repair is unpredictable. What persists are scars. And these scars, to a positivist, might be beautiful, to a post-positivist, might be, brutal. But when we view them, they are not as prevalent ephemeral encounters that need to be acknowledged. So,
Garima, I think that's time if you want to just conclude.
I'm sorry. So the methodological shifts that we are suggesting is more that design historians need to look at them more as stars of archives, which can be studied further and can be documented and used as a legitimate historical material to study. Second, the gestures and the tacit knowledge needs to be studied as an active knowledge side. Third, the broken narratives, because it's not documented and it's, working as a case study with the object through stars and through individuals that are sharing the repair space. So it needs to become a narrative, which is the behavioral aspects. And lastly, we need these historians to step out and document these imperfections so that, ephemeral encounters or collective sustenance is possible. And lastly, while the world is busy prompting for newness, the repairers are infusing the ephemeralities of everyday broken lives. Thank you. Sorry for exceeding the thing.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the presentation because it reminded me of shanties that we have back home in Nigeria, and it's the transfer of knowledge through a form of apprenticeship, gestural as a form of knowledge archiving in a way, if I'm permitted to use that language. So I think I would definitely be engaging you during the Q&A. It's very fascinating viewpoint. I hope you all have some of your questions ready because we're at the last presentation for this segment, which is going to be given by Katie Ann Martinez from the New School, and her presentation is on in-house to Instagram and archives in transition. Katie?
Yes. Hi.
Hello.
Let me share my screen.
Okay.
Okay. See. Oops. Okay. Yeah, those were really interesting presentations and a lot to follow up, so I'll do my best. My name is Katie Martinez, and I'm a digital archivist at the New School in Arts and Social Research University located in New York City. I've been in this role since 2018, and I'm now a graduate student pursuing an MA in journalism and design studies. And my academic work this spring has focused on the chronological development of design archives and our transition to working and socializing in a digital landscape. Considering this timeline has helped me think about my work as a digital archivist and also as a researcher. As a researcher, I'm having a street sweeper on my block go by, so hopefully the noise isn't drowning me out. But researcher interest is one of the greatest driving forces for collection development and has really deepened around archival design records over the last half century and continues to heighten the value of this category of material. As evidence of this, from the 90s to the 2000s, a number of leading art and design schools in the United States established archives departments, including Parsons School of Design, a division of the New School where I work, Savannah College of Art and Design, RISD, SVA, Pratt Institute. Each of these repositories contain primary sources documenting a spectrum of design subjects that touch on fashion, communication design, technology and design, and other creative practices. A likely influence behind this groundswell is the community of design historians that emerged towards the end of the 20th century. I've listed just a few early achievements to convey how this scholarly exploration really buttressed the growth of design-centered archives by creating platforms to share and recognize the value of original research with design records. In the case of Parsons School of Design, a celebration of the 100th anniversary of the school was the impetus to formalize an archive. It was 1993, 3 years before the centennial, and projects in every imaginable format were being pitched, from a documentary, a book, an exhibition, and conversations on the subject all pointed to a need for access to historical documentation. A committee was formed to raise funding for what is now my department, originally named the Parsons Design Archive. And you can see from this memo that they determined the best approach was to have a night of private dinners. This invitation, you can see on the top, in the top corner, was sent to donors requesting that they attend dinner parties where they would mingle with design luminaries from the Parsons community, including alums Isaac Mizrahi, Anna Sui, and Mark Badgley with James Mishka. The parties were called the Parsons tables in reference to an iconic design produced at the school circa 1930. If you're not familiar with it, after learning about it, you'll start to notice it everywhere. It's very simple. And you can see it in the 1980s. I've included some photos of a series of course catalog covers that were all designed around the table. Gifts received from the Parsons tables dinners supported the hiring of an archivist so that processing could begin on archival items connected to the history of the school. Materials stored over the years by library staff, departments, and individual offices began to arrive, along with a flurry of external donations, primarily in the area of fashion. Parsons alumna Donna Karen's eponymous company delivered boxes of marketing materials in the form of videotapes, brochures, postcards, and photographs. Saks Fifth Avenue sent over 1,000 slides of fashion runway shows. The chair of the fashion design department sent a whole store of audiovisual material. And engagement with this nascent repository was seemingly instantaneous. The New Yorker published an article produced with research in the archives within the year. The Parsons Design Archives would eventually broaden to include other divisions of the New School and unify as the New School Archives and Special Collections in 2012. These phases of development for the archives would bring together materials from across the university community that dated back to the early years of the school's history. This is traditionally how materials make their way to repositories, through anniversaries like the Parsons Centennial, and other endings or shifts, such as retirement, the closing of a program, sale of a business, death in the family. These are all events that motivate decisions around how to preserve a legacy. Crossing the same span of years, when archivists were building the infrastructure needed to properly house and process a growing analog backlog, the archives world was recognizing that archival records were being intrinsically altered by the transition to digital formats. The same approach to accessioning, many years after the creation date, was not going to work for digital materials, which are made fragile by their susceptibility to digital decay, format obsolescence, and other factors related to the environment of their creation. We know that 10 years from now, you may not be able to open a file made today if the software has been sunset. And 1 year from now or less, you may receive a 404 message when trying to load a website that was launched yesterday. As early as 1981, an article was published on this topic by an archivist, framing it as the post-custodial era. The author suggested that the only way to get ahead of the rapid life cycle of digital records is for archivists to intervene while the records are still being actively created and used. In this capacity, rather than taking over archival records through transfer many years later, an archivist would provide guidance on care and storage while allowing the creator to maintain custody of the records. While this might have been identified as the ideal solution, there are a number of barriers to enacting this approach in practice, such as archivist labor and resources devoted to that analog backlog, and also just the lack of time and distance, which often helps creators recognize the value of their records and stir a desire to form a long-term access plan. You're just not thinking about the archives when, you're creating and making records. 45 years later, conversations on this subject remain anxious and existential with a focus on loss. So as a different perspective, I want to talk about something new that is created from the challenging digital terrain and to tell a story of what I've seen persist across this span of years. Migration is a term defined in archives as a crucial step in the long-term preservation that moves digital material from one format or system to another in support of long-term access. This could be as simple as migrating an obsolete format like WordPerfect into a current open format like PDF to guarantee continued access, which is what you see a side-by-side screenshot of here. To provide a more complex example, applying web archiving technology to form a capture of a live website that can be emulated in the Wayback Machine. So after the site is no longer live, this allows one to interact with an archived snapshot. The goal of these migrations is to maintain the properties of the original file as accurately as possible. This is especially important for design records where visual elements from color to layout and scale are essential to preserve. Design records are also frequently difficult to migrate because they're usually formed in systems that are morphing and always being replaced. You can see from the two examples between the WordPerfect and PDF and these two websites, it can be difficult to distinguish between the original file and the derivative version. This has also been referred to as translation. I'm still workshopping this, but I want to make an argument for a new term that describes what happens when the systems are so daunting in their complexity that the only way to migrate content is to find a non-standard solution and kind of like a unapproved by archivists solution. This could occur because the creator does not have the aid of a trained archivist to assist with a technical migration plan, or because the preservation tools just can't keep up with evolving technologies. So transmigration is the idea I've been considering. This term is usually applied in a spiritual context, describing the movement of a soul from one body to another, often after death, and without the loss of memory or knowledge connected to their previous existence. So if you'll just bear with me without getting to the weeds around that definition, in the context of archives, I'm applying it to instances where a format has become greatly changed during a migration from one system to another. So while the original meaning, look, and feel of the media is maintained to the best of the ability of the person initiating the migration, the functionality or technology behind the format has been greatly mutated during the translation. So I'm going to demonstrate this through examples that were produced nearly 30 years apart. The New School launched its first cyberspace campus called Dial, a distance instruction for adult learners, in 1994. The Internet Archive would not start their automated crawling of websites for another 2 years, and it wasn't until 2001 that the Wayback Machine was made available to the public with their early snapshots. This screenshot shows a capture in the Wayback Machine from 1996. It's the first snapshot of the site. And much of the content is missing throughout when you're like clicking around, but you can view kind of an approximation of the site at a time when web design used huge margins. Along with these pioneering web captures, the archives has design files created for the Dial site circa 1999 that were transferred to us in 2008 on floppy disks by the former director of online learning. The dozens of JPEGs and GIFs and PNGs include web page mockups, logos, icons, and other static elements that paint a picture of what early web development was like. These fragments can be viewed together to understand the presentation of the site, but they do not offer the same experience as browsing a website like you might experience by clicking through the Wayback Machine. As a much later example, I have a student-produced digital magazine from 2022 titled Back Matter. The publishing style is impermanent by design. Each semester, a new issue is created as a microsite with a unique visual identity. The subscription-based web hosting ends sometime after the academic year, at which point the site is removed from the live web. Time-based project sites like this are common across the university and represent a substantial category of new school history that's at risk or just already gone. So when I tried to create a web capture of this magazine with Archivit, still the leading software developed by the Internet Archive, the results were not worth saving. You can see from this recording that the landing page displayed a looped moving image as the background, with links to each article appearing as movable icons, mimicking the functionality of a computer desktop. An emulated version seen in the image here has a collapsed menu that doesn't open, and the icons are missing entirely, preventing any path to the articles. So it's really useless. The site was developed with the site builder Cargo Collective, which is used a lot, at least in the United States, in the art world, and by many designers. And it's classified by the Internet Archive as dynamic web content, a more recent style of coding considered to be a known web archiving challenge. This is characterized as content that changes based on the behavior and preferences of the user, particularly anything highly dependent upon human interaction. For example, a click is needed to activate something. These qualities define nearly every social media platform from Instagram to X, as well as many other widely used applications for web publishing like Google Sites. When the Archivit support staff cannot determine why the captures continue to crash, I used web browser plugins to make screen recordings and PDFs of the pages, and then cataloged the files in the New School Archive's digital collections. This low-tech option might be compared to the documentation of a museum exhibition in the form of floor plans, photography, and videography. While the art hung on the walls, the wall text, and the experience of a visitor at the museum exhibition cannot be stored in an acid-free box, the visual, oral, and written evidence of it can be used to understand the presentation. The materials could even provide a blueprint to resurrect it. Non-standard solutions like this democratize the archive through homegrown methods that do not require technical expertise or expensive niche software. The non-archivist can preserve this way, as well as archives that do not have funding or the capacity to devote time to keeping up with evolving digital practices and skills, which is really not an uncommon situation in institutional archives. These two website examples, one from the early days of the Internet Archive's existence, the second from an advanced stage, show how the preservation technologies are not able to keep up with what I have heard described as an unrelenting pace of change. I could share other materials in our collections that were preserved with non-standard solutions, such as the file directory of over 6,000 emails from the 90s and early aughts that the creator exported as WordPerfect and EML docs, or the Instagram posts that were captured as MP4s and iPhone photos. Translations that strip the underlying technology and changes the way we interact with and view the media. But since I'm really now out of time, I'll end by saying that I see the future of design archives being comprised of these transmigrations, fragmented media that will need to be contextualized for new audiences who only know of Instagram as something that their grandparents played with.
Thank you.
And so next we are going to go to Zeph, I believe.
Hi.
Perfect. Hi.
Okay, to share my screen. Give me a sec. And to share screen. This work? Thanks, work. Okay. Okay, so thank you for having me. And I'm really sorry I'm doing it as residency in China. Probably my network's not as stable to connect to.
Sorry,
And
Zeph.
yeah.
Would you be able to close the tools on the side just so that people can see
Oh,
it?
yeah.
Thank
That
you.
should be
Yeah, perfect.
yeah. Remote like this way. Okay. I'm doing the art residency in China, so probably my network connector's not that stable, and I will try as more fluent I can do. And so thank you everyone for having me. And I'm the Jeff Chang, I'm PhD candidate from the University of Melbourne, Victorian College of Arts. And yeah, so today I'm talking about I call that the Ridout order. So for title it's a little bit emotional, but don't worry, I will flip the art that part and unpack this as we go. And here's a simple version. I'm thinking the design history and have a blind spot. There's a kind of the order out of there and the kind of design there's a field just doesn't really see. And today I'm gonna try to point it out and give it a like name. And let us start here. This is China, 1972. Nixon visiting, and it's along the road his car comes through. We can see it is huge billboard, a political slogan, and crown is starting in front of it. And the state is speaking through the print, loud, red, and numerous. But I'm not starting here because of politics. It's starting here because of visual logic. Texas authority scale as a hierarchy, print as tool of the state. This is a frame I want to go and head on to. And yet, look at it. Here's a straight board down to one short and a plain spoken paragraph. I think even here is something in the blind, but obviously just doing a job. The organization, some decided what's going where and saying the same. Even the most ordinary print object, nothing signed, nobody called it design. Still have some kind of order. This is Take this is Grönkoppen. We call that in the Mandarin 粮票. It's in the 1955, smaller than a business card, cheap paper, ruffle print, and no designer, no brave, made to use and thrown away. But look at this, its border is clearly ordered to do it. And it's have the demolition big, but authority smaller, is smaller still. But no nothing, there's not nothing, but actually really interesting. And so, why is nobody really studying this thing? And why does this feel odd outside design history? It comes to what feels correctly ask an object before we still even look at it. Three things, I think it's roughly. First, authorship. Some have to move a decision. Second, coherence. The elements have to relate to each other on purpose. Third, finish. Some kind of craft, some evidence is made with care. And here is the saying, nobody wrote this down. There's no rules and no teaches them, but they are there. The first defect assumptions about what counts as a design worth looking at it. And we keep going with the philosophy. It's about to be fair. In the 1986, Edward Forty wrote Objects of Design, and this was really move. He pushed design history away from the masterpiece, the coin, and the famous names, toward everyday, mass-productive things, the ordinary stuff that mattered. What is important. But authorship studies state every 40 ordinary objects still designed by someone, for someone, with some purpose. So this had moved, it didn't disappear. And Victor Morgan pushed in further still. He's argued a material culture approach. One is called made room for designed things with no real aesthetic ambition at all. Things are trying to beautiful, again, important work, real work. But even here, even with Morgan, you can still ask a question, who decided it should look like this way? So this had to move again and again, it didn't disappear. And what's still outside? Look finished, on function first, even else second, print matter nobody wrote twice about. This grand coupon, this related tickets to permit to pass the watcher. And here's the saying, the objects are missing because nobody get around to them. It's not oversight, it's structurally excluded, and the whole vocabulary of the design history just gets no grip on them. Think about it. You cannot to authorship analysis on objects without no other. You can do a compositional analysis with something else older when even composed, even they're productive of any one in intent. The toes don't fit, but we haven't tried it. They don't fit. And this claim I wanted to make. This isn't a gap in coverage. It's something to fix by editing a few more case studies, a few more objects to fill in the map. And in the disk hold itself, the problem is disk hold. It's condition design history using the decide that thing in even worse look at it. So I have some given to you concept. I'm calling it residual order. Here's what I mean. Residual order is a low limit of visual organization. It's what is left when you're stepping everything away. Is have intentional gone, as a ship gone, finish gone, or is this real case is even this to begin with? And I want to careful. I want to be very careful about this. This is not. It's not field design. It's not field of the good design. It's a design that is quite make it. It is something before all of it. Periods of those categories. It is flaw. It's a structure flaw. It is the last amount of visual order as print things need, just to work. This is objects I'm working with, and I have a three analogical layers. So I want to put it out. Like here's a part I feel very interesting. Three layers is very stable. They hold different parents, different decades, wildly different print quality, and three layers stay put. The first layer is layout. Every ground coupon, whenever it's made, organized surface the same way. The borders fill the frame or border. Something said is age of the object. And inside the frame, this is an order. This has have a domain inside. The number, the amount, the domainist, and the biggest thing, the issuing authority, the ministry, the provincial revenue, and the state earners. So it's vulnerable, and the technical data is here, and several information. That's down to the bottom. And you can see it right here. The some spherical hierarchy repeated across different coupons, across decades, with nobody coordinating it, and no sure designer, no style guide, and no intention behind it consistently at all. And second layer is typographic coding. The typefaces on the coupon, these are not be chosen. It's inherent. Society is this is a very domination and authority test. The functionality is for secondary information, every time the same, even now. So, and it's the design decision. It's not a real thing. It's a residual typographic grammar of Chinese state printing, and it's written back through the Republican period, back into the older culture of official documents. The coupon just last piece is showed up, and so here the destination is I want to talk to you. So the coupon doesn't make a typography choose; it transmits of the typography convention. It's not choosing; it is carrying. And the third layer is legitimacy mark. What is looking at there is two field, but either side of dimension, and the stamp positions. As coupon is they are empty. The stamp even landed, but one is never vacated. But at the same thing, the empty space is not incidental. It's not a blank and it happened to be there. Structural, every coupon of the class hold the space open. Whenever it gets using on it, and the position fixed. The size is conventional and the function as a location. This moment and the print slip because the valid instrument that is built into the object insert the print. So think about this, the meaning, the stamp of the comb, the stamp is never comb, but the field is always already there. So and it's the third layers of residual order, not test, not layout. The space held and open, but in intervocation of authority. The structure's comment becomes the content. The object is already to be organized, but anyone has decided who organizes it. So there's three layers: layout, typography coding, and the legitimacy mark. It's not a design system. Nobody set it down as design as a system. Nobody planned it as set. But structural minimum, the last kind of the object's needs, just a function. just to work at what it is, and exactly what makes them working look at. They are independent of intention. The order is real, the order is stable, and no one choosing it. Let me run those cases very quickly, just show what I mean. First one is case one. 1955 national issues, no interrelation. And the most stripped down version there, roughly printing, and even the frame, nothing here, anyone couldn't deliver it, and yet is very dominant. As royalty underness, date bars and button, all the three layers fully there, with usual orders already reigning. And case 2 is 1965, same issuer, 10 years on. Now it's offset printing, clearly recognition, more consistent, and something new showed up. The pictures are drawn, a harvest, the power lines, the whole thing is very perfect print. New technology, unanimity, you can expose new design. And third case is the 1968 Jiangxi Parents Cultural Revolution. And this moment is very interesting there because of the brain added supreme directive as creation injected straight into the field, the pure idealism context and industrial imagery from the before, replaced revolutionary things now on. So think about the pressure on this object, the moment the intention, political force, the pushing down of the visual from themselves, the contents being mobilized and make to the ideological work. The structures it doesn't move through the time, through the year. I think something is kept consistent, keep inside the design of it. And the analogical there told is not natural. And I'm not running out of time. Okay, sorry. And I just to my conclusion, and this close is already good sharp. As my emotional landing is not what over the compressed the worth of it, but you can tending without losing human bit. And the coupon with the game someone we don't know their name, maybe not even the province, just someone somewhere in the decades when the Chinese days of the whole country through the paper, and a huge system, almost completely analyzed. There's a there's a person bought a grand visit and it will be cancelled or is thrown away, but or just lost. This one survived, didn't show the mouse accident, but papers uh, fills up because office are slow to clear their files because fail collectors starting serving before they will be gone. The object was never meant to be analyzed, it's meant to be used and over exchanged. And yet, it's not empty, it's carried on ordered, stable, readable, and with a history. And that is all it didn't need a designer, it's only needed object to work, to be read, and to be exchanged. It's no confusion about what it is. So here's I'm really saying that is enough. Look at the design whenever visual order or be desirable, not only where we can credit someone of it, move the line there, and I think at the moment you do, a huge amount of the visible just come into the well. The ground open is a one place to start. And thank you so much.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you so much. So next we have Karen. So I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen and set the timer. I have a timer. Is this? Oh, wait a minute. This is different. Oh boy, other Zoom. I have, wait a minute. Okay. Do people see my first slide? Could people hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Wait. Did people see my first slide?
Yes. Yeah, we saw your slide. It's changed now. Yeah, you're back on it. Oh.
Okay. So let me. Okay, don't start timing me yet.
No, don't worry. I won't start till you start.
It's the Zoom, it's a new application. It's a little different than the old one.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, so everybody sees that. Okay, so just want to thank the whole team for working so hard and inviting me to speak today. I'm going to start my timer now. So the name of my presentation is Postcards of Parisian Theater Women from a Vanished World to a New Life in Display. The height of the Belle Epoque, 1890 to 1914, or the beautiful life, paralleled the golden age of the postcard, 1895 to 1915. That was achieved by mass production and consumption. Postcards of theater performers promoted their celebrity through this form of photographic consumerism. These postcards epitomize the ephemeral, since they were transitory objects for collecting or mailing a quick communication to a friend, akin to email today. So these surviving postcards are the material culture, which serves as the primary source for the vanished Belle Epoque. Today, these visual stories remain as a glimpse and wonder into that world. So I'll first present a brief overview about the Parisian actress, the golden age of the postcard, talk about a few actresses, and then my project, Museum in the Box, that displays postcards and embellishments that embodies a new life in display. During the French Third Republic, starting in 1870 to 1940, theater performers transitioned from being viewed with social disapproval to respected national icons and even considered the first modern celebrities. The judgment of getting paid to display oneself to entertain audiences was considered low class and even immoral. Society's contempt was especially for actresses that saw these women as prostitutes, albeit some were courtesans. The perceptions of the stage performers shifted with the socio-political climate of the time. So in the late 19th century, the economic conditions improved by a growing middle class that could afford entertainment. Women started to attend more theater performances from plays, operas, cabaret, ballet, and so forth. So fashion made a presence in the theater scene where women were competitive in displaying their couture, like today. In the 1870s, the introduction of the postcard revolutionized communication. This quick, short form of communication, compared to the traditional letter, was not accepted by everyone in French society. Similarly, photographs appeared as postcards in the 1890s that was met with objections. The fear was that people would forget the art of letter writing and reading. The educated upper classes considered postcards as vulgar. Nevertheless, tens of millions of postcards were mailed weekly in Europe. The postcard traveled beyond urban areas to rural towns, which served a democratizing function. The working class had access for the first time to participate in popular culture by learning about landmarks in cities and countries that were not accessible to them. So the zenith of the golden age of the postcard is when collecting became a phenomenon, or often referred to as a craze. Postcards were an integral part of the tourism industry, and they were not just bought for commercial reasons, but individuals collected postcards for their family albums, which was a form of domestic entertainment, and swapped postcards for their collections. So by 1900, there were international postcard shows, local clubs, and magazines devoted to this hobby. One significance of the postcard age is that it laid the foundation for the silent film star industry that emerged in the 1910s and 1920s. So the postcard industry covered a wide range of subjects, graphic styles, printing advances, and hand tinting techniques. This side shows on the left a very famous Art Nouveau illustrator. In the middle is a color tinted photograph, and on the right is a tourism postcard of the Eiffel Tower. So again, the advances in printing technology was instrumental in promoting mass consumerism, which gave rise to the celebrity culture. So theater actresses gained more respectability through the print media, specifically theater playbooks, theater and fashion magazines, and posters that featured their stage costumes and offstage fashions, and I will be showing you examples later. Some of the famous fashion designers, including Levon, Redford, Poiret, Erte, Pequan, Bateau, and others. And some of the magazine articles that showed photographs of the actresses with their children were to convey the same traditional family values as a means to gain further credibility. Okay, so the actresses. I'm going to just briefly talk about three actresses that, to me, reflect the range of ephemerality from the least to the most, and that is based on surviving information. So the first actress, Jane Hating, she represents the least ephemeral because there's quite a bit of information on her, which is one reason why I selected her. She's not on my coat, but the others are. In any case, she was an established actress in France, England, America, and toured South America. Her father was an actor and introduced her to acting when she was 3 to 4 years old, which is when she started to perform in comedy plays. She traveled with her father to the French colony of Algiers, where she played ingenue roles in plays. So her career just continued to flourish. And she once remarked that she made oceans of money. So she was well financially. And throughout the 1880s, she played some of the same very serious acting roles as her famous counterpart, Sarah Bernhardt. So her theatrical career was relatively short-lived, where she retired in the south of France in the 1920s. So nevertheless, the faded memory of Hating was revived temporarily through an exhibition and accompanying catalog book, Staging Fashion, that was at Bard Graduate Center, New York City in 2012. So Hating branded herself as a fashion influencer. She had partnerships with the most prestigious fashion designers, notably Redford, which was her favorite. She designed some of her own theater costumes made by Lafayette, and she collaborated with the milliner Carlier that she did advertisements with. So theater goers looked to Hating as a fashion influencer, like movie fans throughout the 20th century and today. And I'll just the image on the left and the right just show you some costumes of her performances. On the right, wearing Redford, in the middle, selling cigarettes. It was considered a trading card that went as an insert into the cigarette package. So kind of the mid-level is Arlette Dorger. She is on my coat that I'll show you. She was a prominent Paris-born actress, dancer, and singer that reached international fame throughout worldwide distribution of postcards depicting her stage costumes and her ethereal beauty. She was known for her hourglass figure, where her corseted waist was reported to be less than 20 inches. She also made the headlines, for her romantic relationships, especially her rumored relationship with Count Boris of Russia. So at her London debut in 1908, she was billed as, quote, the Parisian queen of vaudeville, unquote. And after her theater career, she earned money by branding herself to sell chocolates, perfumes, soaps, and toothpaste, and was a financially independent woman. She was able to buy her chateau at 24 years old, which I think is impressive. And that's where she lived the next 30 years. And later she moved to Morocco and then back to Monaco. Okay, so she definitely was adept in branding herself. She was a model for postcards and posters and different advertisements also. She graced the cover of theater and fashion magazines on the left. She wore Pequan for Le Mode's fashion magazine on the far right. Is her theater costume for one of her roles that was in the theater magazine. not good at pronouncing French anymore since I'm no longer fluent, but you could see it. And then in the middle, she modeled for Scala Theater, where she also performed. And the last actress, Bhardwaj, she represents the most ephemeral actress, since there is no readily biographical information on her life and career, including her first name, her birth date of birth, country, and family of origin. Her surname is Northern Italian or Old French. So again, there's no really locatable information on performance billing or venue. However, the postcard stamp on the very left image is dated 1907, which gives temporal information when she was most likely active. So she must have attained some level of accomplishment since she was photographed by Routlinger, who only photographed accomplished performers and was the most prestigious studio. So I think, intensive archaeological research into theater studies would have to be undertaken to possibly uncover any biographical information. So it would probably entail being in France in person. Obviously, you would have to know French, because more of the minor performers that haven't really left a legacy, they're not in the digital databases. And the information is derived from surviving ephemeral, which is postcards. And the image on the far right is on my coat, and that's the very first postcard I ever collected. So again, the name of the project was Museum in a Box, a new life and display for the ephemeral. So my interest in fashion and the performance arts led me to use my postcard and button collections for a museum studies course assignment. The purpose of my project was to depict actresses and costumes as an installation piece with the concept of dress as canvas. The canvas was a long black velvet coat served as a neutral background to display the postcards of actress Parisian city scenes, buttons, and appliques. And the coat's V-neck held a bouquet of dried flowers to shout bravo to the actress. I'm just going to have to speed up a little bit. So my apologies that this slide probably looks kind of cluttered, maybe confusing. So the middle image is the front side of the coat. On the left side are close-ups of the left side of the coat with some of the buttons and appliques. And then on the right side is the same. And the front side showed the urban monuments and cityscapes of Paris and the actresses. On the back side was a little bit of a different narrative because of the postcards I found. And so the top half it's more the natural world. So from Italy to the seaside to gardens. So Italy, and actually a 1920s woman, not a theater actress. But the bottom half on the right is a Spanish dancer that performed in Paris. And just imagine her performing. I have postcards of the Alhambra. And then the bottom right and left are two performers performing some type of Greco-Roman or classical dance, which was very popular at the turn of the century. And I've displayed this coat before I moved to New York, 2019 at San Diego History Museum as part of the educational programming of a fashion exhibit and the Women's History Month at San Diego Mesa College. So I wanted to include a slide of some of the buttons so you could really see them. They stem from the 19th century to very, very early, some Art Deco, but so you get a little bit of a better idea here. And then the very last slide, just be real quick. So how to preserve memory, I just kind of listed what I think is the obvious for this kind of niche topic, and then some conservation resources that specialize in paper objects. That would include postcards. Hearing that. And just want to, again, thank the team for all their hard work and answering all my questions and having me here today. It was kind of nice to be able to use this old project. And if anybody has any questions or comments, would love to hear from you all.